Hello, class. This is your professor, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm here today to give you part two of our lecture on queering your practice. And what it is about is adjusting and developing and continuing on Jungian principles into the contemporary neo-Jungian age that we're in now in 2026. And part of that means really evolving our practice and going beyond some of the things that Jung discussed in the early 20th century before we really even got into a lot of this, well, it's been here for thousands of years. Human beings have always had gay, two-spirit, transgender people around, but now we're really getting to a point where people can come out and be honest about it, and we need to update our psychology in order to deal with that. So I'm going to give you a little lecture on that, on part number 2. We've already given one about the general overview, and now I'm going to go into some of the details. Let me share my screen. So let me get rid of this. Now, so analytical psychology, which is the psychology developed by Carl Jung back in the early 20th century, when he had his confrontation with the unconscious. And believe me, Carl Jung had a lot of transgender and gay type of experiences in his whole career, and a lot of other things going on in his life, and a lot of pansexuality and throuple action and all the stuff. He was really open to different types of sexuality and to women in general and men and all different types of people. So analytical psychology and the queer psyche, from pathologization, pathologizing people, pathologization, to individuation. So we're moving from seeing this as a problem. Remember, homosexuality was in the DSM till 1972. So it's not really been that long in the history of the world that we've been open to these things as way we are now. A doctoral seminar on the intersection of depth psychology, history, and the LGBTQ clinical practice. And this is me, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm a professor at the John F. Kennedy School of Psychology at National University. Beyond the binary, the Hellenic perspective. So let's look at the binary, which is Hellenic, back in the old mythological days. So we're looking here, the modern era, the binary schema, hetero versus homo. Sexualis, 19th century, defined by object choice and rigid identity categories. So there was you're straight or you're gay or object choice, who you're relating to, not about your own sexuality and who you are. This is a lot more subtle than what we first defined. And the ancient indigenous relational schema, not this rigid binary opposition here, but you had all different kinds of weaving of, in the R's, Erotica, that we all have an erotic issue there. We all are erotic, and so you have so many different types and visions, and masculine and feminine and mirrors and narcissism and sexism and all those. Ars erotica, defined by social role, behaviors, and intensity. Fluidity over category. So they're not trying to break people down into rigid identity categories, but they're understanding everybody is fluid, and throughout your life and throughout your whole movement in the world, you're going to be operating under different ego states. I always say, if you saw me playing with my little 1-year-old granddaughter, or you saw me at a 49ers football game, or you see me teaching this class, I'm accessing a lot of different aspects of myself, and I'm acting totally different situations. The binary schema of hetero-homo allows us to understand very little of the sexualities of other times. The psychological type of the homosexual does not exist. Lingardi, who's one of the Jungian scholars that we're reading here. Divergent paths. They had different ways of looking at it. Freud, Jung, and the enigma of choice, the mystery of choice. Is there choice, or is this born with it, or is this choice? How do we think about it? Freud, as you can see here, smoking his cigar, he's saying biological determinism, and he used the term polymorphous perverse, which means all holes. Everything, your sexuality throughout the whole body. Acknowledge the enigma of object choice, the mystery of object choice. Why do we what they mean by that is love objects. They're talking in object relation language like Melanie Klein. But the object that your affection, that your libidinal energy, your psychic energy goes to what type of object, which is kind of saying, who are you attracted to? But viewed through a biological lens, like men are attracted to women because they can have, and vice versa. Jung, not determined by your history, not being pushed forward by your past, but Jung believed that your true self, who you were meant to be, is out there in the future and it's pulling you forward. Teleo means end, study of ends, how things end up. So Jung early dismissed homosexuality as a relational problem. Later evolution provided tools, complexes, and the unconscious, especially the collective unconscious, to deconstruct prejudice. Jung was much more open than Freud. That was a big part of their breakup, had to do with gender fluidity and the place of woman in our society and that kind of thing. For Freud, only his daughter got to be a woman. If you look at the pictures of Freud's group, it was all men, including Jung and Anna Freud. Jung, half the people in the pictures are when you go to the Eranos conferences and look at Jung's who he's hanging out with, it's 50. And Jung was the first one really he created and taught many more feminine, female Jungians than. And many of his Jungian analyst colleagues that he had that Jung kind of created were gay and lived together. Barbara Hanna and Marie-Louise en France lived together for 40 years. Paraphrasing Freud, we might say the choice of homosexual objects is a phenomena every bit as enigmatic as that of heterosexual objects. Yes, it's who you choose, who you're attracted to is not necessarily always based on their gender, but hair color, eye color, what all the things you're interested in, their eyes, their self, the architecture, the modern alchemical journal, the archetype of suffering, the heteropatriarchal complex. We're all kind of controlled in this heteropatriarchal complex. In other words, heteropatriarchal, it's all based on property getting passed down. And I talk about that in the previous one about my colleague who's a Chamorro, who's a person from Guam, and how the United States, when they took over Guam, made a matriarchal society, made all the property and all the names changed to the father's names. That's the norm. Heteropatriarchal system, which is based on keeping stability in the family with the father as the top in order to keep the economy straight. Okay, it's not a desire, but a systemic cultural complex. Like the racial complex, it casts the other into the shadow. So it's a cultural complex that says you're supposed to be heterosexual. So anybody that's not that, any two spirits or any other type of person that doesn't fit into that rigid, narrow box is the other. Just like right now we're treating immigrants, they're in a sense sexual immigrants as a metaphor. And the mandate is to diagnose the system, not the patient. So if you look here, we have queer identities, unintelligible shadow, and then the norm of how you're supposed to be. The path out of the shadows will not be found by diagnosing the illness that queer people are presumed to suffer from. Pessoa, who's one of the Jungian analysts that we talk about in the lectures here in the next couple of weeks. The queer complex and the anatomy of shame and internalized sexism and internalized homophobia. Okay, we have the queer complex and the authentic self, the queer complex and the anatomy of shame. So, internalized structure formed by the societal rejection and the ugly duckling wound. I don't fit in. I'm not like these other people. What's wrong with me? Something is wrong with me. So many youth have told me that, and they've internalized so much shame, and they've internalized that something is wrong with them, that they're broken because they don't desire the same people as others do. Shame. Or as they believe, they don't realize how ubiquitous we're all on a continuum in reality. Ever since Sandra Bim and her famous realized we're all on a continuum of masculine, feminine, gay, and straight, all have different parts. And as we change and evolve in our lives, that is going to change. Shame. The unconscious belief that the self is disgusting or unlovable. Human beings, according to Blankenship, developed the idea of disgust way long ago when we were like amoebas or like round on all fours and that kind of thing, because we had to learn not to eat these berries, so they were disgusting. So things that were dangerous to us became the feeling of disgust, and somehow that now gets projected onto actual people. Fragmentation. The psyche splits to survive when desire is labeled sin. Okay? A lot of Christianity and all that happened too. So we have dissociation, a disconnected, painful core separated from the ego. So a disconnected, painful core. This leads to dissociation, which is a part of trauma and separating from yourself. And sometimes gay youth become an object to themselves. They objectify themselves. Dancers and athletes do that a lot also, where they objectify the body. My body is wrong, or my body is not the same as everybody else, or it's broken, or these are all thoughts that we need to deconstruct in our psychotherapy. The path out of the shadows will not be diagnosed by diagnosing the illness the queer people are presumed to suffer from. Yes. The shadow of the Syzygy, the Thanimus. Okay, the shadow. So this is bringing in the concept which first came from Sabina Spielrein, one of Jung's paramours early on. This goes through, you have the Erotimus, the desire. This is from the god Eros, the god of war, Ares, and the god of beauty, Aphrodite, had a baby, and that was called Eros. That's love. And Erosmus is what we look at as this loved one. And now there's also the Thanatos, the death instinct. So there's a dark and a light when it comes to the Anima and Animus. The Erosmus represents connection, values gender difference, vibrancy, and life. Look at that with the beautiful roses and other wonderful colors. And then here you have Thanimus, the Thanatos, the death instinct, represents judgment, a destructive element fostering clinical deadness and dread, where the person dreads who they are because they feel like they're so different. They've internalized that. So his work, which he has developed these new terms of Erosmus and Animus, Thanimus, clinical insight. Faulty attachment creates Thanimus, a force of psychological discontinuity. And it's so important that we have good attachment. When the attachment is broken, it causes people, no matter what their orientation, to hate themselves in a sense, because they've internalized that. Deconstructing the archetypes. We have the old model of masculine, feminine, orthodox contrasexuality. Men have an anima, women have an animus. Okay, the new phenomenological model that comes from John Beebe, that the Anima and Animus are symbolic functions. In other words, we all have both. We have this symbolic feminine inside of us. I have it, a lot of it. And we have a symbolic masculine in our psyche too. The soul, the spirit, interiority, your interior life, your agency, your connection. These are symbolic functions that go with the Anima and the Animus. The problem, Orthodox dogma claims gay men lack the anima, as an example. Solution, new anima and animus as functions of the soul and spirit and sexuality. So they're functions of our parts and our deeper self. Source, I don't agree with the theory of the anima and animus should ever have been used as a theory of sexuality. It's a symbolic thing that's inside all of us, and that's the famous Jungian analyst. He's 87 years old. He's a wonderful man. I've been watching him for 40 years, and I was there the night that he came out as being the first gay Jungian analyst, openly gay, in the 70s at the Unitarian Universalist Center in San Francisco, up above that wonderful restaurant where they serve all kinds of things. Okay, a lot of good restaurants in San Francisco. Now, the new archetype that was evolving is the Animum, and that's proposed by James Perrin, and it's a triangular, it's a three-part, where you have the body facticity, the fact of what your body is. That's your plumbing, who you are, your sex. Then you have your desire, who you are attracted to, who you want, what type of person do you want. And then you have your social identity of how you identify. All those three things have to work together, and they're constantly changing. Your desire changes as you age and as you grow. Your social identity changes. Your body can even be changed. So a Trinitarian archetype of sex, gender, and sexuality. Okay, so it's body, mind, and spirit there, all of them. Represents fluidity, creates, negates, and destabilizes gender, all three. He creates gender, does the opposite, and destabilizes it. The goal is navigation of the landscape, not a fixed resolution. So we don't stay in any of these areas. We're fluid, and that fluidity allows us to have more absolute freedom, in the sense of the sociologist, Jungian analyst Stefano Capani talks about the I versus the I. The I plus I. In order to you have to have individualization, which means being able to become who you are, like, hey, I'm straight, or have your own identity and set it yourself. Versus individualization, which individuation, which is Jung's term, which is not about identity politics, but it's about becoming who your soul needs and wants you to be. So it's more inner driven versus outer driven. Dream work. And this is from John Beebe's famous dream of a Peggy Wu, who's a real person. The case of Peggy Wu. Peggy Wu is introverted sensation. She is a laundress, a Chinese woman who's a laundress in San Francisco, where John Beebe would bring his clothes to be laundered. And she's very detailed. She's into herself. She's introverted. She's very detailed, very organized, very related to the body, and understands her inner feelings about things. Neglects her self-care. She's working hard. The husband, extroverted intuition, expensive energy, has all this. And so this is the dream that John Beebe had with these two characters. Source, John Beebe. The psyche genders images to convey qualities, not sexual orientation. So she's gendered as a woman in his dream, not because of sexuality, but because of the typology. This is his anima. John Beebe is extroverted intuition himself. His weakest function is Peggy Wu's best function. So we're trying to balance the psyche. The Anima and Animus are about balance. They're symbolic. They're not truths about us. They're universal, that we have different of those balances that we need to keep, but they're not mandated by any particular tautology. Peggy Wu represented the dreamer's neglected autonomic nervous system, not a sexual object. So the dreamer isn't really relating to his own body, his own detail, his own how he feels on the inside, how actually senses in himself. She's sensation. She's really detailed. He's all about figuring out what his next bet is. Or John Beebe's figuring out his next client with his extroverted intuition as his main consciousness. Now, John Beebe, obviously, through this dream, is developing his feminine, weaker side, which happens to be feminine to him because of the symbolism, not because of some desire. The mythic map. This is from Doss too. The beanstalk as a mythological example. The Thanimus, dread and stagnation. Map for the masculine development. You got to climb the beanstalk and be higher and higher in the hierarchy. Task, transitioning from mother complex to personal authority. The magic beans are the naive intuition that needed to escape from clinical deadness. So when we're repressed, our masculine side, he has to come against the mother and break away from the mother in order to become his true self. In Jack and the Beanstalk, we're talking about Jack. The magic beans are the naive intuition needed to escape clinical deadness. Hidden potential of the unconscious, erotic connection, and Cormont Garamond, which is a famous story. Mythic maps too. Let's go a little bit into the Eastern side of things. Eastern religions like Hinduism, Shiva, Sati, and the androgyne. Ardhan of Vasara, the lord of the half-woman. This is a picture of her. Adan of Vasara, the lord of the half-woman, represents the postmodern self that transcends binaries. Sati, the figure frozen by shame, turned to stone, represents the trauma of the queer complex, the trauma, the sati. Arab Adara, the friendly warrior. This is the strength that's going to come out of this relationship of these different parts of ourselves. We're going to become stronger as people. The mythology provides a symbolic framework to reframe personal suffering in divine integration. Yes. Embodying healing, yoga, and Soma. Okay, so this is a dissertation that was done by a student at Pacifica Graduate Institute that I happened to connect with. And healing yoga and Soma. The problem, the queer complex lives in the body as frozen trauma. That's that frozenness, that turning into stone. The cure, descending into the head of the Soma, of the body. Asana, Parahamana, those are breathing exercises and that you have to bypass cognitive defenses. And when Jung was through his confrontation of the unconscious, when he wrote the black books and the red book, which I'll talk about in a future lecture, he used yoga in order to calm himself down when he would get so hyper aroused by the kundalini energy that was moving in him. Samadhi, connection to divine consciousness, divine integration through embodiment, through the body. And so yoga is an excellent way to get to know our body and to get our love our body and accept our masculine, feminine, or in between body or wherever we are, to accept it and to love it the way it is. Synthesis, the queer heart of individuation, which I'll give a whole other lecture on the queer heart of individuation in a week or so. North, the anonymnium, fluidity, the myth of shame and transformation, the body, Soma, and the yoga. The shadow, the Animus, that's the shadow, that's the Animus of the death instinct. Individuation requires embracing the other. We must embrace the other, which is why symbolically in our country, all this like anti-immigration are killing people because of where they come from or how they even look or whatever, having babies or children taken away from their mother, all that. We must mature beyond the narrow identity to reflect the authentic diversity of the human soul. That's our job as Jungians and as psychologists and as therapists, is to move beyond the narrow identity to reflect the authentic diversity of the human soul. We have all these parts inside of us, as it says in IFS. Clinical mandates for the analyst, the modern therapist, needs to have these 4 things down. We need to accept this and we need to understand how to work with it, no matter what our own personal system and our own identities are and our own various different things. We have to, as therapists, are supposed to rise above that, which means to abandon the binary, replace homo with sexualities and intensities. So it's not this or that. It's how intense is it and how there's diverse sexualities, more than one. We all have more than one. Number 2, follow John Beebe's example. This is just my opinion, but that the anima and the animus are not contrasexual parts inside of us. They're symbolic functions that are used to help us on our path to individuation. So I might feel masculine sometimes, feminine sometimes, or all these other different ways that maybe even don't even have words for them yet. Symbolic functions. View anima and animus as functions of connections, not gender enforcers. View Anima and Animus as functions of connections, not gender enforcers. Yes, they're symbolic systems. Diagnose the system. Recognize the heteropatriarchal complex and the whole idea that we have this shame because it's based on the economy and keeping the family stable so children can be raised. And we see how good that is working right now in the United States, where, 60% of the kids are raised in dual home or triple homes, and there's complex things that are going on right now. And we need to be able to break down the heteropatriarchal complex and see the fluidity of nature and how we need to apply that as therapists. And us therapists need to embody the cure. Utilize somatic tools like dance therapy, movement therapy, yoga, and mythic maps like mythology, and like the comic books I make up are art, and Jungian-based art research to heal the disconnected core. And it's so important for all of us because we're all disconnected now because nobody fits into this system in their whole lifespan. At some point in your lifespan, you're going to be alone, or you're going to be breaking out of those things. It gets me a little choked up to think about all that people have to go through. References and recommended reading as teaching classes. I want to make sure that you have the Linardi, Ars Artica versus Scientia Sexualis. That's an article that he wrote. You can look it up in the National University Library or any online library. John Beebe, Let Go of Identity, Embrace Complexity. Pessoa, he wrote an article on the heteropatriarchal complex. Perrin, the Animum. Harder, The Queer Heart of Individuation, which is a doctoral dissertation on healing the soul, healing the soul. That's the queer heart of individuation. The psyche, the soul, is not a binary machine, but a fluid landscape of becoming. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, let me just take a minute. I'm going to say goodbye to you, and I really want you to know I'm happy to bring the topic to you because it needs to be talked about. I'm bringing it in June, but why do we have a particular month? We need to have this fluidity and this understanding of all peoples throughout the whole psychology, and I'm on a mission to kind of bring it out and have as a heterosexual male, I want to take a stance where I really follow in John Beebe's example, and we're able to deal with these things in a way that's healing to all people. Okay, very much. This is Dr. Brian Lippincott, and my book is Analytical Psychology and Family Systems, Neo-Jungian Practice to Help Families Find Flow. Forward to seeing you again in another lecture.